Order in the Court of the 21st Century Robot Man. That's what I'm calling this video. I've been uploading videos for a few days now, and I think I'm ready for something a little bit longer, a little bit more confessional format. So, in this video, I break the ice on what exactly has been going on in the past couple years from my perspective. I'm greatly inspired by Leanna Kersner, whose video today on Mark Kern's hashtag Gamers Are Good really got my juices flowing. So, I've been paying attention to internet drama for a long time, and in 2014, it all went to shit in probably the greatest internet flame war ever. And in that time, everything's kind of gone to chaos. So, basically, I'm going to say that I've been experiencing life in chaos for past couple years. And it hasn't been fun, but it hasn't been so bad. And I think I can talk about it. Thanks to, thanks to my friends and family for sticking with me. While I try to articulate things that happen entirely on cyberspace, in spoken word casual dialogue, because talking things through is a lot harder when we are differentiated by our mediums. So, let me back up. Basic story is, in 2014, the internet started fighting, and then conversations started getting banned from multiple sites at once, and then the news media, I'm talking New York Times, MSNBC, CBC, started listening to internet trolls who are, the leaders, the forefront, the most active activists of social justice, but who were also demonstrably, provably, bullies who were being mean and going around shaming everyone. And I mean, that sounds very childish, but no one really knew that this was going to explode into some big, massive internet thing that causes everyone today to lose faith in social media and whatnot. Forgive me if I'm a little scatterbrained. This is my first time trying to get it all out here. So, 2014, people start fighting on the internet, and it was video gamers who are really good at organizing and launching campaigns and being shamed as a bunch of straight white males who hate women en masse, indifferentiated, with no recognition for the individual people and their actions, instead using this group politics idea of shaming just general vast categories of people, right? Like, today there's a big issue with identity politics, and yeah, it went massive in 2014, it's like today we have the Me Too hashtag, and everyone's trying to get past, like, oh, why are we just treating men as one big block, and why are people treating women as one big block, and why can't we treat each other as individuals? And it's like, yeah, that's what we've been fighting about for the past 3 or 4 years, and only now, as this thing that started on the internet, which no one cared about, only like in the past couple years has this thing bloomed and blossomed and worked its way into social consciousness, and now you have people like Jordan Peterson, the Toronto University professor, on the news going around saying conservative talking points, and his self-help book becomes the #1 best-selling book on Amazon. I've read it. I liked it a lot. It helped me formulate the notion that the past 3 years have been chaos, not just in the world, but in my head, and that I have been working on restoring some semblance of order. So, I'd like to share some of that order with you in this Order in the Court of the 21st Century Robot Man. The guy who's helped me pull it together the most is Marshall Mcluhan. Because he gave me the perfect framework to contextualize everything in terms of, and like this would be something people already know, but I have to say it in a very structured way. Different media, creates different environments for people, and the media you choose to engage with depends what you see of the world which is being sent to you. So if you read newspapers, you read about the world. If you watch TV news, you read about the world. If you surf the internet, you read about the world. But it's a different world for each person, subjectively speaking. But more so, what Marshall Mcluhan really helped me understand is that this dynamic of things changing over time, over the course of decades, where television has only been around for like 70 years, I guess. 80 years. And it was new and fresh, and now it's not. The internet was new and fresh for people in the 80s, and the World Wide Web was new and fresh for people in the 90s, and social media was new and fresh for people in 2007, 2008, and now here we are 10 years later, and it's starting to show its wear. So there are some patterns which can help shed a lot of light on why things are in chaos, and it's a generational gap exacerbated by the media that you grew up on when it was hot and fresh. I don't use social media, like I didn't use Facebook or Twitter that much, but everyone I know does, and I get it, and I use it sometimes. I'm more of an older internet guy. I feel like a 90s kid who surfed the web, which is very different from social media, right? So some of the things that Marshall Mcluhan talks about, which I'm so captivated by, and it's helped me understand the spectacle of the world as I've been watching it through the internet, probably obsessively, probably to my own detriment, to my, I'm gonna admit I've been kind of a bum this past couple of years, because all I've been thinking about is all these things which are outside of my scope or power to really control or do much about, and yet I think about them anyway. So helping me think about them has been the notion of Marshall Mcluhan's that there's a difference between paying attention to the content of a medium versus paying attention to the medium itself. People who pay attention to the content of a medium, they interpret a different subtext to what they're looking at. They fill in the blanks differently. They, in their mind, they ensconce or structure or compartmentalize what they're looking at differently, depending on how media literate they are. So that might have sounded vague. Here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this a phone or is this a computer? We call it a phone. You pull up the number pad and you dial a number. There's a word dial. You know what that means? Dial. Like back when phones were like, right? You dial this like a phone. You use it like a phone. You talk to people on the phone. It's content. The content of this is a software phone. So we look at it. But we're talking about the content when we call it a phone. What this really is it's a computer. That's how I see it, because I'm a computer guy. And you know what computers are for? They're for being programmed and hacked and played around with as a hobby for computer guys like me. Now, most people who bought a smartphone in the past 10 years aren't computer guys. They don't have the agency, the knowledge, the awareness to look at this and take it apart and articulate it as a computer. All right, this is a Linux computer with a shell, slapped on top, a GUI designed by, right? Like, I think when you understand something technically, and you have that technical way of looking at it, that becomes a ground for you to stand on to then see the figure of inside of it. Like, okay, I can use this as a phone, or I can use it as a terminal, or I can use it as a video game platform, or I can use it as all the things that I use a computer for, right? I can write programs for it. I can do anything with this, right? Compare that to the viewpoint of someone who buys a phone, goes to the Play Store or the App Store, and scrolls through the best apps in hopes and they try to trust it, and they read the contract and says, we reserve the right to use your private information for this. Or maybe they don't read the contract. They agree to some terms written by some lawyer, and they install some app, and they put all their personal information in it. And now 10 years later, they're going, wait a minute, oh, the world's spying on me. I'm starting to feel paranoid. Like, I'm going to admit, that gap between media literacy, between understanding what you're looking at as far as the medium, and looking at just the content of the medium, which is always the old thing, which is always the old familiar thing that you're looking at. You look at this like, oh, this is a new phone. You're living in the past, and to use McLuhan's way of looking at it. McLuhan said that the content of the written word is the spoken word. So here I am speaking, but everything I'm saying could be put out in type and put along a little subtitle for you to read along, right? And everything, right? So the spoken word might be in this video. So now we got written word or spoken word in the written word, and that written word is now in a video, and that video is now on a web server, on a computer, playing through a screen, which is something we used to call a television, right? Like, medias nest inside one another, and if you learn many different technical specifications to classify all of the technological mediums and devices in your life, then you see the world differently from someone who walks around, looks at a screen and goes, oh, that's a funny show, I like that character, right? That person lives in a different world. If I'm looking at a screen and I think, oh, this actor is doing a very good job portraying the character which is conceived in the the mind of the director and was probably intended by the author of the script, right? Like, how do you analyze what you're looking at when it's not the real world that we grew up in, but instead a mediated environments, right? We're like, this book has got a lot here. Let me talk about the sort of things that this 50-year-old book would consider a medium, which contains things. Let's see, where's that? And there's got to be a table of contents somewhere. Here it is. The spoken word, flower of evil, chapter 9. The written word, eye for an ear. See, like, eye for an ear. Like, the written word, you're using your eye to do what your ear does, because you're hearing the spoken word with your eye, right? Roads and paper routes. Number, clothing, housing, money, clocks. The print. Comics. The printed word. Wheels, bicycles, airplanes, photograph, press, motorcar, ads, games, telegraph, typewriter, telephone, phonograph, movies, radio, television. Weapons. Great. So, who was Marshall Mcluhan? He was a University of Toronto professor, English professor. He was an English professor who, like, went to University in Manitoba, went around, very book literate, and then he watched television happen as a phenomenon, and he noticed it was changing the generations. People who grew up reading books and listening to radio were a different generation than people who grew up with the television. And he chalked it up to different sensory ratios, which is, you got sight, smell, taste, ears, touch, right? You got your senses, but the ratios of how you're using each of those together to blend into your single perspective of what's going on around you changes depending on the media you're exposed to. When you're listening to headphones, you're using your ears a lot, and it's a different sensory ratio than when you're reading a book. And sometimes you can do both. But Mcluhan said that our bodies go numb when we're amplifying one sense and dulling all the other parts, and we're kind of like moving our inner body around to be different to fit our nervous system and our outer body. And he talks a lot about controlling your media usage and being aware of how often you use different mediums to like gain some balance and some equilibrium and some sense of just like being the same person all the time, pulling yourself together. It's not about what you're watching on TV. It's the very fact that you're watching TV at all. It's not about what video games you're playing. It's the fact you're playing video games at all is going to have a bigger effect on you. But whether or not the effect, like to the degree in which you are affected, is dependent on your media literacy, which means if you know how video games work, you're less likely to just only be focused on like the characters and the story. You're also more likely to be analyzing the game design, right? There's people who watch movies And then they grow up to become filmmakers, amateur filmmakers, professional filmmakers, because they learn about what script writing is, what storyboard is, or what the director does, what the director of photography does. Maybe they own a camera and they get good camera shots, right? They look at movies with a different perception than someone who casually watches a movie and enjoys the story and gets sucked into a story. And, you know, people who watch TV and get sucked into a story have different conversations and thoughts about something on the television medium than people who watch it and are actively taking that movie apart in their head. They're reverse engineering it. They're applying critical thinking about the film. Which brings me to a new topic, which I might as well cover here. Hell, let's make this video the whole shebang, shall we? So this guy wrote these books in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And he was an English professor, but he was a very interesting guy. He was inspired greatly by Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. Which, if you go look up Finnegan's Wake, you'll realize it's a book full of multi-layered poetry and gibberish, which combines sounds and senses and all sorts of things all together into this sort of very strange... it's a very strange... Excuse me, I gotta fix my recording thing here. Finnegan's Wake is like a LSD trip on paper. It's a whole bunch of weird rhymes. It's a whole bunch of... and apparently it's the story of how subsequent waves of media changed our sensory perceptions, right? In a world with just the handwritten word, people tended to, to read out loud to themselves, according to Mcluhan. And then when Gutenberg invented the printing press, that really internalized an inner voice in your head that was removed from your mouth. You could think in words, somehow magically removed from lip motion, right? When everyone became literate, the past, changed who we were as people. And now television and electric media and seeing faces on the screen and is pulling us back into an oral tribal culture. And that's why I had to warm myself up to the idea of sitting here talking into a camera, because all of the thoughts I'm saying now are stuff I've been thinking years ago, silently in my head, and typing on a keyboard. I can type 110 words per minute. Usually, I've been arguing about internet drama and, what's wrong with Twitter and what's wrong with Facebook. I've been using my fingers to argue about this stuff for years, and it's taken me until very recently to put it all together with the help of Marshall Mcluhan and thinkers who build upon his work to realize, no, you have to adapt to the tribal culture and be an oral, cultured person and talk about the problem, not just type about the problem, because it's still kind of all bottled up. I think when people say people need to talk about their problems, it's like they are talking about their problems, but through a medium. And media literacy would really help people open up by overtly demonstrating how all the thoughts you're thinking about are encoded in, say, pictures, because you are a movie person and you see the world a lot in pictures, or words in a book, or I don't know, interpretive dance, because we live in a world full of different forms of expression, and different people latch on to different forms of expression that work for them. It's really hard to round yourself out if you're not constantly forcing yourself, or being drawn into, or otherwise pushing yourself to find new forms of expression, not just the ones that you're comfortable with. You can expand your empathy for other people when you learn to appreciate their different forms of expression, which is done through practicing it yourself. We all have to speak 27 languages, and only one of those languages is flapping your lips. One of those languages is arguing on the internet, and one of those languages is, the language of love or something, right? I don't know, like all the different ways in which people can empathize are determined precisely in proportion to the medias which individual people use to express and or relate to the world. See, this shit like this blows my mind. And I'm not sure if what I'm saying this is really dumb and obvious, or what it feels like to me. It's aha, this is what's going on. Because what's going on to me, as far as I can tell, is that, well, I use the internet way too much. And I was brought up in the early 2000s, back when organic, bottom-up internet forums were a thing. So if you were on the internet 15 years ago, you were visiting websites of people who were building their own community, making their own rules, selecting their own moderators, working out the rules. It was a bottom-up, organic, grassroots thing. And communities would grow and thrive, and everyone would know each other. And there were a couple big websites. Something Awful Forums being the one which is, in my mind, like it was the central city surrounded by all the little villages of different websites you could go to. This is how I saw the internet back then. Right? And it was something for nerds. It was something for geeks. Again, Leanna Kay's video and Mark Kern's Gamers Are Good hashtag is really resonating with me right now insofar as trying to communicate. Listen, nerds are nerds, and they're like on the outside of things, and no one gets them because they understand technology and they use it as Marshall Mcluhan says, as an extension of man. And then I'm sure I'll flesh this out later, but this is just a preliminary brain thump. And then the iPhone came out. Steve Jobs, who in the early 80s gave us graphical user interfaces and metaphors which kind of hid the guts of the computer, he did it again and pulled another rabbit out of his hat with the smartphone, with no buttons on it and with only easy metaphors and easy icons. And we ended up with Twitter and Facebook and Google everywhere and Amazon, right? And hey, if that's all you know and that's your electric world, fine. Like, that's your electronic world. But I think that society's been misled to a degree by the market which grew up around social media, right? There's a million companies out there analyzing Twitter trends, and there's people out there offering businesses advice on how to leverage social media in order to increase brand awareness and facilitate true, market participation and all this stuff, right? For 10 years, a bunch of people have been making money selling books to people with money on how to use social media in the world, but they've presented a false view of the world. Like, they're talking about the content of the computer, but the computer never gets explained. I'm working on a documentary series about the history of computers, as far as I can see it, in the way that makes sense to me. It's called Silicon and Charybdis, and I want to keep working on it. And I've actually had lots of encouraging feedback from Andrew Mcluhan, the grandson of Marshall Mcluhan, who likes it. So it's very gratifying, and I'm going to keep working on it. And because I really think if you don't understand computers, then you might be getting into a lot of trouble, and you might be scared right now, having spent the last 10 years throwing your personal information and your opinions and your politics and your shopping habits and all of your photographs you've been putting, maybe, I'm not sure, not everyone, there's a lot of people out there, I'm surrounded by well-meaning people who are starting to question whether they made a good decision buying a phone 10 years ago and throwing their whole life on them. And I really don't know how to communicate in an optimistic way. No, you didn't make a good decision at all. You made a terrible decision. You should have read the contract, and you should have never bought something this powerful that could mess you up as much as maybe you suspect it has been messing you up. How do you know if it's messing you up? Is if you are getting exposed to lots of beliefs that you can't compartmentalize, and you think that the world is turning into a big hate fest. It's really not. That's just the internet being the same internet it's been for 20 years before you ever came along. Listen, when I was growing up as a teenager, I was seeing awful, horrible stuff. Pictures of all the worst things that can happen in the world. Today, you can go to LiveLeak and see liveleak.com. It's a website kind of like YouTube, except it's where people upload the horrible videos of something that got caught on a security camera, and there's a lot of like terrible stuff on there, right? All the horrible things that happen in the world every day. You can go see it. And these are things that, unless you were talking about the Vietnam War, in the late 60s, when you sit down to watch TV, you tend to be shielded from the worst of the world every day, and yet when you're on the internet, you get to see the worst of the world every day, and everybody is represented, including hate groups, because everybody's represented. You're touching the world. The internet is a big electric environment full of people. Don't think it's full of information. It's full of people. And the world's got a lot of different people in them. And a lot of weird opinions. And some of them are just nasty. So I got used to this 15 years ago. I just assumed, okay, there's lots of horrible stuff in the world and I can go see it, but I control my computer. I control the websites I go to. I control what I'm exposed to. And I can safely come near things and maybe like desensitize or, grow strong against or grow less afraid of, right? Like, and then 10 years ago, social media and Facebook and Twitter came along, and the newspapers and the magazines and the news anchors on the television news told a whole bunch of people, hey, go buy a smartphone and get on the internet. It's great. You're going to be able to connect to all your friends. And it's like, I spent 10 years going, no, it's not, no. And now we need answers and positive thinking. So that means starting from the worst case scenario. And this is where I love Jordan Peterson. His new book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, which is #1 selling book. Don't worry, in a few years, if you haven't read it and you don't have a cent to your name, in a couple of years you'll be able to walk around a thrift store and there'll be 27 copies of it right next to Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, right? It's going to be one of these, right? There's going to be a lot of those books published, and it talks about awful stuff, all the awful stuff in the world, from the perspective of someone who studied, like Auschwitz and the Gulag Archipelago. Jordan Peterson starts at the base of terribleness that exists in the world, which the internet is now showing to people, and you're all kind of waking up going, wait a minute. There's lots of weird, awful shit in the world, and lots of people who are trying to throw this stuff in my face and argue with me, and yeah, there is. And like all of society is going to have to adapt to the fact that you wandered onto the internet, and that that all the walls are falling down, and you can't not sometimes be exposed to hate speech, which isn't being censored. Because when you censor it, it just pushes and moves somewhere else and becomes more festery, or it disperses and gets spread everywhere, and yeah, there are dynamics to how information works. And so I'd like to spend the rest of my life just working on helping people see and humanize each other and talk about things as individuals in all the different mediated forms of expression which are possible. I'm reaching a new audience by sitting here talking in front of a camera, and I had to learn how to do this. I had to become comfortable sitting in front of a camera. I am very comfortable typing my thoughts about all sorts of things on a web form somewhere, typing paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs and arguing with people back and forth, right? The internet has traditionally been a textual medium where you source everything. You cite all the studies which back up your evidence. You provide links to all the evidence you have, right? Like, the internet is full of people who have been debating using the best they can, emulation of academic rigor and intellectual, substance that they can. And the traditional mainstream media and Twitter is full of a bunch of people shouting off at the mouth unsubstantiated rumors, no sources in anything, and there's a massive trust issue as the world transitions between trusting reporters and experts and people like me, people who have to double check everything for themselves and go and double check your work. And if someone tells me something, I'm going to go find the study you cited and I'm going to read it myself, and I'm going to decide whether or not you interpreted the study correctly or whether you're twisting the facts to try and, right? Like, marketing treats people like robots who can be triggered by their amygdala. And you know this, if you have a smartphone and it dings and you have to pick it up and you're sitting there scrolling through Facebook for hours looking for that next hit or that next like, and you're posting things hoping that someone posts, right? You are being manipulated by a computer interface. And I'm so used to, I've spent 20 years, over 20 years on computers. I've spent 20 years on the internet, learning how to dodge those sort of, how might you say it, slot machine, robotic slave to your computer things. I don't use Windows or Mac OS. I run Linux. I own my computer and I program it to do what I want. I don't need someone to make an app easier. I go learn how the thing works and then I customize it to my style, right? There's a difference, right? The biggest fight right now, and again, I'm rambling, jumping from topic to topic to topic, but it's very relieving. And again, I'm greatly inspired by Leanna Kersner. Go check her out, Leanna K. I'll post her link down below. You can use this YouTube thing. Being able to just get it out there. And I've been trying to warm myself up to talking about this stuff on a camera for a while. And you might wonder why I haven't before now. That's a different story. Anyway. Okay, this video is half an hour long. I'll finish with my interpretation of Mcluhan, which I only made condensed last night into this little thing here. Here's how I understand Marshall Mcluhan. According to Donald Teal in his book The Virtual Mcluhan, he was a colleague of Mcluhan's back in the, for his life, but in the 60s and 70s, Marshall Mcluhan, the interesting English professor, was like the first big academic to go around on all the TV shows, and everyone loved him, right? He got the same treatment that you can see Jordan Peterson getting today. It's just a funny coincidence that they're both from the same university even, right? But Marshall Mcluhan stood up and started talking, and the world said, I want to hear what he says, and he became a really unpopular public intellectual. See here, at the back of this book, the book came out in the late 60s, the back of the book, Marshall Mcluhan is the new spokesman of the electronic age, the oracle whose revolutionary ideas have blasted an explosion of debate from academy to coffee house. He's like a major e-celeb, which is e-celebrity being something that I am defining as starting with Florence Nightingale. You might see that in my old video, Prelude to Silicon and Charybdis. But an electric celebrity is a regular human person who is suddenly in the position of having their image amplified by instantaneous media, where what they're doing live is resonating and connecting with other people, and other people around the world are empathizing with them, even though they're not in the same geographical vicinity, right? It used to be, if you were important, you would stand in front of an audience of people, and you would be all in the same room, right? And people still stand in front of audiences, but look at me, I'm sitting here looking at a camera, pretending I'm talking to the whole world. I have to pretend that I'm talking to a whole bunch of people in my head, just to sit here and talk on YouTube, right? So, Mcluhan explains the science of that and how your perception in your head of what it is you're doing when you're talking into a camera or when you're sitting staring at a screen is built up depending on how well you understand the technology. That's what he did. He wrote poetry and weird sentences about the technology. He said that the television, he basically took this book. This is a wonderful book, The Physics of Television. And this book, published in 1960, is a breakdown of all the science necessary to understand how televisions work. You got a chapter here called Lights, right? And then they go on here. You got the light spectrum, right? And then a little later, let's see here, what's in here? Electricity. Oh, look, and now you get to learn the science of electricity, amps and volts. Oh, my. Right? You get to learn how transistors work and vacuum tubes. How magnetic fields fiddle around the needle on a compass. Listen, this is all real stuff. Electricity is a thing, okay? So, this isn't nerd stuff. This is birds and the bees, basic, regular, you want to understand the world, you should understand this stuff. And the internet lets anyone go learn this stuff as you need to go learn it. You don't need to go to school anymore to learn this stuff. It's funny, because Marshall Mcluhan wrote a book called City as Classroom about how to go around and learn how to go learn stuff on your own without, anyway, yeah, without needing to sit there and have a curriculum spoon-fed to you. So here you go. Ooh, they got some color spectrum. Anyway, as you understand, oh, look, here's the cathode ray tube, the big vacuum thing that makes up most of the weight of these big old TVs, right? Let's see here. We got, I remember there's a flowchart of a tuner. Yeah, look at this. Here's a flowchart of an analog television camera having its picture voltage and amplified and synced to a signal generator and transmitted through a cable connection, and then having that signal decomposed back into the horizontal and vertical magnetic pulses would sweep the image. See, this is how old TVs work. They weren't like LCD screens today where it's just pixels. There were no pixels on an old TV. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, a TV was a single fast dot that flitted around and went brighter and darker and illuminated little colored patches. It was like spiraling a little bit. Red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, back, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue. Getting brighter and smaller, right, or brighter and dimmer to create the picture, going really fast. And Marshall Mcluhan would write poetry. Based on the principles of what was really happening, to try and explain to people what they were looking at, right? He'd say like, the image is being projected onto your retina. When you're in a movie theater, the image is being projected onto a wall, right? Film is a strip of little pictures which are being illuminated, boom, 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 on the wall, right? A television is projecting an image as a single dot into your eye, painting a picture onto the screen of your retina, right? Which is extremely different. It's very different. And yet, people watch a movie in a movie theater, they watch a movie on their TV at home, they think there's no difference. There's no, right? A movie's a movie. They're looking at the content instead of looking at the media. Likewise, I'm using a phone. You're talking about the content. You're talking about one particular app. This is a computer, right? These distinctions seem really simple. They seem like obvious, but also they need to be spelled out explicitly in order to create the structure to understand the content as it is being delivered to you by the medium. So, Marshall Mcluhan explained the media of his day in the 60s and 70s, and he talks a lot about computers too, but computers back then were logic amplifiers for the mind. If you had to program them, and you had a logical system in your head that you could sit there with paper and work it out all day, or you program this logical system into a computer and it does it for you faster, right? So computers are amplifiers for our Aristotelian logical part of our mind, right? And that's what computers are to me. But to other people, maybe to you, a computer is a device to run applications and software. A computer is a Photoshop machine because you're a photographer and you use Photoshop. And when it breaks, you need to get a computer technician because you don't know how to fix it, right? But you can use a computer for a specific purpose. In this case, you're engaging the content of the computer while remaining, I don't want to say ignorant, but you haven't mastered the medium itself. This, my friends, is the biggest difference between people today. Their media literacy and their technical understanding. And you know what Marshall Mcluhan did? I started saying this and I got sidetracked. According to Donald Teal, in his book, The Virtual Mcluhan, Marshall Mcluhan was the first public intellectual who went around saying crazy, poetic-sounding, obscurant things. And he was subscribed to. His magazine was... You know who read Marshall Mcluhan a lot? Jacques Derrida. And lots of other postmodern thinkers. And a lot of them were French. And in the 70s and 80s and 90s... Okay, allegedly, the door to obscurant, which means lots of big funny words, hard to understand, right? The door to weird sounding, smart sounding stuff in our university system, postmodern, expressions in art, the door was opened by Marshall Mcluhan. He opened the door to that. He gave everyone a taste for weird sounding, funky, hard to understand poetry. But when he was doing it, he was describing technology. I've only skimmed lots of postmodern authors. I've read lots of Jean Baudrillard. I like Baudrillard. I've read a bunch of Deleuze and Guattari. I've read these postmodern thinkers, and they got lots of fascinating ideas, but their works aren't grounded in a perception of the real world of you surrounded by machines and media capturing, images and extensions of yourself. That's not what they're focused on. Marshall McLuhan was focused on that. I want to get back to him, and I kind of want to sidestep all the other important, smart-sounding people who weren't concerned about how the world actually works. Because if you don't understand electricity and the technical workings of what computers really are, and how they exist in people's minds differently depending on that person's technological literacy, then you're not going to be able to understand me when I explain the world to you. When I say, oh my god, there's a flame war starting on Twitter because activists are being, seriously, you can go find these arguments everywhere. Activists are being led by internet trolls who are going around shaming and bullying people, calling them, using identity politics, right? Oh, you're just a white male. Oh, look, we have to defend this person of color, right? All this stuff. They're internet trolls. Have you ever dealt with an internet troll? No, I don't, apparently not, right? But we've been fighting internet trolls using identity politics for 3-4 years now in wide open combat on the internet using our fingertips, and it's taken over Twitter and it's taking over Facebook, and everyone's calling it fake news, and everyone's looking for a name to encapsulate this new group of people who are freaking out about the left, and they're getting called the alt-right, and everyone's calling them Nazis, and it's a big mistake because the people talking about it have different understandings of how information flows in the world today. Social media is big, but that doesn't make it the ground, the proper level of analysis for understanding the world today. The proper level of analysis, I believe, for understanding the world today is understanding that in the early 70s, Intel pioneered the creation of the microprocessor, and the microprocessor can be programmed to do anything, and that a computer science teacher and a former naval engineer named Gary Kildall created an operating system called DOS and gave away tools to everyone to program the microprocessor. Parallel to that, Apple and Commodore and Tandy released computers that booted into BASIC, which is brought to everyone by Bill Gates, and BASIC was a good learning basic computer language, and everyone in the 70s grew up with a computer where they learned a programming language to amplify their minds, right? So you can program the chip, and that's low level. You're programming the chip. That's working with the medium. That was used for professional cases. Computers, like our offices in the 70s, they used Gary Kildall's DOS. And home users, they learned BASIC because it's an easy to fun to use programming language, and that's what computers were in the 70s and early 80s. Then IBM comes in, and then they try to get Gary Kildall's DOS on the recommendation of Bill Gates, but Bill Gates was like, what? Gary doesn't want to give you his operating system? Okay, I'll make you a version, right? Bill Gates stole the market when Gary Kildall said no, and Gary Kildall refused to work with IBM. And no one's heard of Gary Kildall now. Well, people like me have, computer nerds. But he's a very important figure, in my mind, in the style of Marshall McLuhan, illuminating the ground of the medium, the proper ground of the medium. His operating system, DOS, reveals to users the file system of their storage. There was files on a thing called a disk. That's what DOS means, disk operating system, right? Here, look, you can divide the ones and zeros in your storage into files, and the things that get loaded into RAM are executable programs, which are also files. Like, the idea of having files on your home computer that are run off a disk, and writing programs for your CPU and compiling them into programs you can share with people, right? That was all pioneered by Gary Kildall. And he saw that we were going to have computer networks, and he saw all this stuff. And so anyway, good for Bill Gates. Excellent business success story. Working with IBM after Gary Kildall made a mistake and refused to work with IBM. And so we have Microsoft DOS for the 90s, or the 80s, right? And the 90s. And at the same time, Steve Jobs and the Lisa team and then the Macintosh team pioneered graphical user interfaces for the home computer user based on work done by Xerox, and there's a whole history, and I'm going to spell it out explicitly in my future YouTube works, but I'm just running through the quickie story here, right? Steve Jobs gave us all picture metaphors of icons you can drag around your desktop. It's called skeuomorphism. That's what the word is for when a computer program looks like a real thing, right? Oh, the computer desktop is just like your real desktop, and you have documents on the computer that you, right? Steve Jobs brought us all these metaphors, and this metaphor became the new ground. You didn't have to learn how computers work, you just had to learn the metaphor. Oh, look, here's a file. It's an icon. My file's an icon. I drag and drop it with this mouse, which is like an extension of my finger, right? Like, if you learn how to use computers based on having learned how Macs work and learning Windows, but you never understood how a CPU works, then you're living in a different world. You're walking on an elevated metaphorical ground created for you by artists, but you haven't broken down through to the reality of the actual perception, right? And then on top of the graphic user interfaces today, I'm saying, in a similar vein, we have the internet, where you can connect your computer to someone else's computer and send data back and forth. And that can be a website, that can be a chat, that can be an encrypted email, that can be anything, right? You got the internet. And then you have social media, which is like 4 or 5 websites, like 3 companies, right? Like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, right? Like there's like a handful of companies who are the ground for social media users. It's like, oh yeah, I live my life, and then I got a Twitter profile, and I have, a Facebook account, and that's the only thing I use the internet for. Facebook and Twitter and sending emails to my granddad, right? Those people live in or walking on a ground created for them, to which there is things beneath that. And the people who see the world beneath that level, they're looking at the medium, not the content of the medium. Those people are in different perceptual worlds, and no matter how much they talk to each other, they're always going to talk past each other, especially when they're talking about things like politics or ideologies or like men versus women and culture wars, right? People who grew up seeing the world through different lenses at different levels, and who can interpret things concretely or abstractly. I think this is the proper level of analysis for having people grow closer together, is for people who understand the world at different levels to communicate that, and for us to all start working on understanding the systems that are real and which govern the world first, getting familiar with that first, before we start arguing about things that are all about opinion and open up to interpretation. How can anyone share a common opinion if they're not first seeing at least the same basic things that are inarguable that everyone should agree with, like, electricity travels down a wire, or, like, trolls shouldn't be responded to because they're just trying to push your buttons, and if you let them manipulate you, they win, right? Like, there's all these rules that are failing to be communicated because of these different levels of abstraction. So, this is my first, I feel like, real heart-to-heart video on YouTube. Having eased myself into it, and I'll keep them coming in this style, hopefully not this long. I know this is really long. But I'm feeling really relieved having broken the ice. So, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to put some donor links down below. Sponsus is a new startup for helping content creators, independent content creators like me, continue to create work and be funded. It's a crowdsourcing site. And they've got a very interesting business plan. They're catering to people who create content which is often blocked or banned from other platforms like Patreon. And I'm also going to put a Patreon account down there because I opened one a long time ago and never used it. So, all right, let's do this. If you want to throw me a couple bucks, I'm going to keep pumping out videos like this. Click at the links below. Until then, thanks for listening. I feel better already. If there's like 1 view on this video tomorrow, like when I check, I'm going to be like, oh, thank goodness. Because honestly, returning order from the chaos is all I want to do. I've been walking around in chaos for 3 years. I think I've finally found some freaking order to what's going on, and I'm going to keep pumping it out. So wish me luck. And until next time, Take care of yourself. Bye.